I'm not judging her for being naive or inexperienced. I'm judging her for using a bad experience as an excuse to be an asshole. Let me tell you a personal story about a time I tried to help someone. I hired a guy about 3 years ago, and for about 2 or 2.5 years, he was by far the best employee I'd ever had. I think in 2.5 years, he called out maybe 3 times. One day, I noticed he's putting small charges, like personal charges, on our company credit card while he's out doing his job. I don't think much of this because I don't really care if somebody stops at like McDonald's or 7-Eleven to buy a pack of cigarettes or something, like whatever. But then the charges started getting more frequent and slightly larger, and they eventually got frequent enough and large enough where my accountant noticed it and brought it to my attention. Around the time his spending on our card was increasing, he also started doing something he'd never done before, which was routinely showing up late. And apparently, all this was happening around the same time he broke up with his girlfriend. Now, this guy years ago had told us that he'd had a history with drogas, and not just like little, but like some harder things. So, without delving into too much detail, we were starting to see signs of a potential relapse. I brought this to my partners, and all four of us decided our job is to take care of our guy. Like, let's let him know we know what's up, tell him he's got to stop, and offer him whatever resources he needs to himself. So I confronted him about it. I let him know it absolutely had to stop. And also knowing that an idle mind is the devil's workshop, especially for somebody who might be tripping back into something, offered him more hours so he would basically have more time working, making more money and less time to sit around and be bored. And he got better for a while, but the situation at home continued to deteriorate. He started showing up late again, and then the weird charges on our credit card stopped. But then one of my partners noticed that our cash box was starting to seem light. So one day I put $60 worth of my own cash in marked bills in the cash box and figured if I came to the shop the next day and those bills were gone, then somebody was lifting stuff and we weren't just miscounting. The next day, the bills were gone. So you know exactly where this story is going. I set up a security camera in the shop, and that very night he comes in at the end of his shift, and like it's something he does every single day, goes straight to the cash box and lifts out some money. So at that point, with tears in my eyes, I had to tell him he had to go. About a month later, I get a call from my accountant. Why are you paying such and such through PayPal? I said, I ain't paying nobody through PayPal, especially not that guy. Turns out he had copied our credit card or debit card information or something and was now sending himself payments through PayPal. Small amounts that I think he was hoping we wouldn't notice, but of course we absolutely noticed. So I shut down the credit cards and texted him since he wouldn't pick up his phone and said, this has to stop or else I'm going to have to get law enforcement involved. 3 days later, some check withdrawals show up in our bank account. This dude had stolen 3 pages of checks out of two of our checking accounts and was now writing himself, again, small, like less than $200 checks with the word pay in the memo. We end up having to call the cops because at this point he just won't stop. Weeks later, he gets picked up on something related. Apparently, he'd been doing this to like multiple other people, apparently, including his own family members. And the reason I tell this story is because at the end of this frustrating and awful process, the only thing I was sad. I was sad because we weren't in a position financially yet to say, send him to rehab and get him the help he actually needed. I was sad for him and his journey in recovery that went off the rails. I was sad for his grandmother and his mother and his family and all the people who cared about him and were watching him fall. Now, that fellow is a grown man. He made the decision himself to steal from people, and to get himself in trouble, and he's going to have to face the consequences. But I also understand that his behavior, stealing from us repeatedly, is rooted in his addiction, and his particular addiction is rooted in a poverty that started in his childhood. Now, that's not to say that being poor condemns you to a life of drug use and stealing from people, but it does make it a lot more likely. The relationship between poor people and, say, addiction or crime is a lot like the relationship between people who drink raw milk and people who wind up in the hospital from milk-borne pathogens. Most of the people who drink raw milk never get sick, but among all the people who do get sick from drinking milk, 90+% of them are people who drank raw milk. As hard as I work and as talented as I am, the difference in the outcomes in my life versus his life are driven more by investments that were made in me versus investments made in him when we were both children. So, the reason I judge the woman referenced in this comment so harshly isn't because she made a mistake as a real estate investor. It's because her entire TikTok account is one long narcissistic tirade against people who weren't as lucky as her. Go on over to her page and listen to how she, in post after post after post, condemns and dehumanizes poor people. I believe that this notion that you have to earn or deserve your humanity is a collective mental illness that's at the root of everyone's misery, including this woman's. And yeah, she's miserable. Happy people are not this mean. And if, after hearing the way she talks about these human beings, you think that's okay, fuck you too.